Having stable footage is so important to creating a professional looking video. That's why this looks so good right now. David is actually using an electronic gimbal to stabilize the camera so that we can both walk at the same time and get silky smooth footage. But what would this look like if he was just trying to hand hold it? As you can see, this doesn't look very professional at all. So in today's lesson, we're going to talk about everything we use to stabilize our footage. Now let's say you want to start simple and you just want to hand hold your video camera. Just a few years ago, video cameras were gigantic, and so for the most part, people used to put them on their shoulders. If the camera itself wasn't actually designed to be mounted on your shoulder, people would add shoulder mounts to their video cameras so that they could stabilize the footage with both hands and their entire upper body. Now, once DSLRs started shooting video, as you can see, these cameras are pretty small, and so I don't know anyone shooting with these cameras who still uses a shoulder rig. And there's one good reason for that. In many cases, these cameras can now stabilize themselves. Some lenses actually have stabilization built in, where one of the elements inside the lens counteracts the movement of the user. These are usually called optically stabilized lenses, and each lens manufacturer has a different name for this feature. Nikon calls it VR or vibration compensation. Canon calls it IS or image stabilization. Make sure that you learn whatever term for optical stabilization your camera manufacturer uses. Now, some cameras actually have sensor stabilization, and this means that the sensor itself is moving inside the camera to counteract the movements of the user. Not all camera manufacturers actually have this feature. Sony has this feature, Panasonic has this feature on some of their cameras, but currently Nikon and Canon do not. Now, some cameras actually utilize both, like the GH5 here, and we can turn on optical stabilization in the lens and we can turn on stabilization in the body itself. Using both of those together creates extremely stable footage. All right, so I've currently got a 200mm equivalent lens on my GH5 here. I'm going to cut off all stabilization and let's record so you can see what this looks like. And as you can see, just me talking has this vibrating so much. So now I'm going to flip on both stabilization in the lens and the body. Unbelievably smooth. So as you can see, having a stabilized lens or a stabilized camera is huge for having professional looking video handheld. But let's say you want even more stable footage. Let's talk about tripods. Now, tripods are an area that photographers and videographers love to argue about. Some people, like us at F-Stoppers, we tend to go with cheaper tripods. We have a lot of friends who shoot with $1,000, $2,000 tripods. I personally don't really appreciate the super expensive tripods, but I do think there's a sweet spot where you don't want to go below maybe $200 on a tripod because you will start to see noticeably shakier video. We recently upgraded our entire fleet of tripods to the Benro TMA 38CL tripods. These things are relatively affordable at just $300 to $400 for carbon fiber. We love the build quality, we love the size, and these are really easy to travel with. But don't think that you have to go out and spend $300 to $400 on a tripod. Usually if you spend around $100 to $150 on the sticks or the legs alone, that's gonna be fine, especially for DSLR video. You don't have a very heavy camera, so you don't need a very heavy, hefty tripod. Now, if you're already a still photographer, you may own a standard tripod with a ball head or something similar to this, and that's fine to start out with videography. Most of the shots that we do with video are totally stationary, just like the one right now. But eventually you're going to want to pan and tilt while you're shooting video, and for that you're going to need a fluid head. Now, this is a Manfrotto head, and this is what we used to use. As you can see, this thing is pretty big. It's also got one of the longer flat plates. We've recently replaced our larger pan heads with the X Pro 2W by Manfrotto. We love this thing because it's so small, it's so much easier to travel with, and most of all, it accepts the much smaller Manfrotto plate, the same plate that we use for all of our ball heads for still photography. So now we have one plate throughout all of the F-Stoppers offices that works for all of our tripods. It makes things so much easier. So let's go ahead and put this thing together and I'll show you how it works. Just screws onto the top like any other tripod head. This tripod specifically has the screw lock legs. So let's put a camera on here and take some video clips. Now, another reason that I love these plates so much is because they're so small, we can permanently leave them on our cameras. And they also don't take up any space lengthwise, so they fit in our camera bags without any problem at all. When we had the other Manfrotto plates that were much longer, we had to take them off every time we wanted to pack up the cameras. It became a real pain in the butt. Now, I will say that with the larger pan heads and the much more expensive pan heads, you're going to get some more features. What they allow you to do is really fine tune how much pressure you want to have. They also, in many cases, have some sort of rubber band effect where if you tilt the camera down or tilt the camera up, it will try to right itself. And it makes filming moving shots a little bit more easy and a little bit smoother. Now, for us here at F-Stoppers, we don't find ourselves panning around and following a subject very often, and if we do, we usually use a gimbal, which we'll talk about at the end of this section. So if you find yourself panning and tilting a lot and trying to follow a fast-moving subject or a really slow-moving subject, you're definitely going to want to buy a much nicer pan and tilt head than this. But for us here at F-Stoppers, we don't find that we're following subjects very much. Usually when we're filming tutorials, we're just moving around very quickly and kind of locking in on different things. So we want the ability to move quickly, but we're not trying to get super steady moving shots. So I can show you here what I'm capable of getting with this camera. I'll start recording here. First of all, we'll work on some tilts, and I can lock the pan feature so we can just work on tilting. So you can see this looks very professional. Again, it would be easier to get a smooth shot with a more expensive pan head, but this certainly works. Let's lock the tilting here, unlock the panning, and we will pan. There's David, say hi, David. And back over here. So finding the right tripod and tripod head is all about what you plan on shooting. For us, it's all about lightweight, small, easy to travel with, and convenient. So this is the easiest system we've personally found. If you're shooting something like sports, you're definitely going to want to go all out, buy a really expensive fluid head, maybe even one that's electronic, but for us, this is perfect. Now, as you can see here, the camera I'm shooting on is incredibly small. As your camera gets larger, you're going to want to buy a larger tripod and a larger pan head. If this camera was extremely heavy, this whole thing would just tilt forward and fall backward. It would not be able to handle this load. But for what we've got here, it's perfect. So we can pan and tilt with a standard tripod head manually, but wouldn't it be nice if we could shift from right to left? That's where sliders come in, and you're watching me right now on an electronic slider that's doing everything for us. For years, we've used manual sliders to shift from right to left by hand. It creates a really cool look. You can do reveal shots where you might be hiding the camera behind something and then reveal what you're actually looking at behind a wall or maybe behind a tree or something like that. But when Rhino came out with the Rhino Slider Evo, it changed everything. This slider has opened up so many doors for us because now we can set it and forget it and the thing will just go back and forth. So now instead of just doing a simple reveal shot, we might set up the camera just like this and have it go for an interview where someone's talking. And we still got a B camera over here that we can cut to when the slider reaches the end of the track and needs to change directions. As you can see right now, the camera's about to stop and it's going to change direction and start going the other way. Now, the Rhino slider makes everything super easy, and we can actually change how slowly it will ease in and ease out of that motion. So we've made this movement so slow that it actually works really well, even if you want to play through that entire movement from right to left. Now, this slider in particular gives you so many different options for speed. We can have this thing move back and forth very quickly, or we can slow it down a ton and do time lapses. You can also hook it up to a camera so that it stops for every single image, so you don't have any image blur at all if you're taking really long exposures. Now, there's so many different types of sliders on the market right now. Some of them slide on rails that you can put on the ground, and they can go forever, basically, as long as you have the rails going. Other ones go on some sort of track. The Rhino slider itself is on 2 carbon fiber rails that you can mount on a tripod, or it has little feet that you can sit on the ground. There are short sliders and there are really long sliders. We've found that the sweet spot for us is a 24-inch slider. It's still small enough that we can pack it down and actually travel with it. and then having the battery pack built into the Rhino slider controller itself makes this one our personal favorite. If you're just getting started in video, don't think that you have to go out and spend $1,000 on an electronic slider. This is definitely specialized equipment that we do not use very often. But if you're looking for super smooth movement that's really going to take your video footage to the next level, definitely consider a slider, and if you've got the money, look for an electronic one like Rhino's. So now that you know what a slider does, and you know that you can use it to get smooth motion from side to side, or we could have used it to get a push-in shot or a pull-out shot very smoothly, what do you need if you want to get up and down motion? This is a jib. Specifically, this is the Kessler Pocket Jib. We love this one because it's so small, and as you can see, we can actually travel with this, it's so small. Let me unpack this and show you how it works. So this entire thing packs down into an incredibly small unit. Undoing this Velcro and then just kind of sliding it together like it's a Lego set or something. This thing keeps getting longer and longer. So this is it. This is the Pocket Jib totally expanded, and as you can see, this thing gets pretty big. On the bottom here, we have mounted the old style Manfrotto flat plate, and I've got the old Manfrotto pan head that I was talking about how we don't use it anymore. Well, we do use it when we want to get jib shots. So we're just going to slide this plate on here. And using this lock, I can kind of just keep it in place. And the basic premise here is that we're going to add a camera to the front, and then on the back here, we're going to use a counterweight. And if we can get this entire thing balanced properly, moving it up and down, and then because it's on a pan head, swinging it from right to left is very easy to do. Now, you'll notice on the back of this is a small hook, and normally you would attach some sort of counterweight to this. We actually forgot the counterweight, which is perfect because when we travel with this thing, we purposefully never bring a counterweight just because we don't want to have to deal with the extra weight in our backpack. And so what we do is what we're going to do right now. I've just got a random bag. This is actually the bag from the slider that we just used in the last segment. And I'm going to use this as the counterweight. I'm going to put it in this area right here. And then to fine tune it, you'll see it's too heavy right now. I can slide this counterweight forward. And I'm just going to try to get it perfectly balanced so that the camera just sits. That is just about perfect right there. Now, if this was a real production and I was getting paid a lot of money and the client was there, I probably wouldn't use a system like this for counterbalancing a jib. But when we're traveling, every ounce counts. And so when we were recently filming Photographing the World with Elia in Iceland, we brought this jib with us. We didn't want to bring any counterbalances. And so what we did was we just used an extra camera. We just attached it to the back of this thing, let the camera dangle, and it worked totally fine. So as you can see, once we have this thing perfectly balanced, moving it up and down is so easy to do. And then because we've mounted this entire thing onto a fluid pan head itself, we can get movements going up and right to left at the same time. So I can easily have the camera be totally stationary, and I can just do standard jib shots up and down. That's probably the easiest shot to get. The more difficult shot to get is when you try to get a movement from right to left while panning up and down. So normally what I would do here, maybe I'll set my start point over here to the right. I'm going to start the motion of this going up, and then I'm going to pull the head. And you can see I went too fast on that one. So we restart. Of course, if I had a little bit higher end of a counterweight, it would probably be a little bit easier to pull this off, but this is how you do it. And a lot of times we're doing the same shot over and over and over and over again until it's perfect. Now, when it comes to big productions, jibs are still hugely popular. If you see sporting events, they definitely put cameras on jibs to move them all around. TV shows, movies also use jibs. Almost all car commercials have a second car with an electronic jib on top of the car that allows them to capture incredible moving shots. But when it comes to indie filmmakers like us, using a manual jib like this isn't as popular as it once was. There's still a lot of room for error here, and as you can see, we're still manually having to move this thing. We could mess up the shot. The reason why these aren't as popular as they used to be with indie filmmakers is because there's a much easier way. Let's talk about gimbals. This is what David used at the beginning of this lesson to get that smooth walking footage of me when I was talking directly to the camera. Gimbals are a relatively new technology, and just a few years ago, FreeFly came out with the Movi, and I believe it cost $20,000. Luckily for us, with competition, the price has come down significantly, and instead of some gigantic two-arm system thing, now gimbals can fit literally in the palm of one hand. This gimbal here is the Moza Aircross. This is currently our favorite gimbal that we've tested, especially when it comes to smaller mirrorless cameras like the GH5. Let me quickly show you how I can balance this out and get it up and rolling. Now you'll notice that we've added a Manfrotto plate mount onto the top of this with the same small plate that we like using for our pan tripod heads. And the whole idea here is that we can pick up any camera that we own and hopefully it will fit on anything, whether that be a tripod, a slider, a jib, or this gimbal here. So let's go ahead and snap in a GH5 here and let's try to balance this thing out. Now the basic premise with all gimbals is basically the same. You want this camera balanced as perfectly as possible so that these motors barely have to work. So the idea is once we get this thing balanced, we should be able to put it in almost any position and it will basically stay there. All right, so this thing is totally out of whack here. What I'm going to do first is point the camera down and see if I can get it balanced on this axis. All right, I can also feel that this is really top heavy. The whole thing just wants to tilt forward. So I'm gonna slide the camera back here. And you can see if I go too far, it wants to fall backwards. So I'm just gonna find that sweet spot where it kind of wants to stay upright. All right, so I'm just gonna hold the side here and kind of see which way this is tilting. You can see it's falling forward. So I'm gonna change this axis here and just pull it back just a little bit. That should be good. And it's tilting to the left. So I'll pull this one a little bit more to the right. And that is pretty well balanced. You can see how much smoother it is. I can put it in any position. And even if it does tilt back to the center, it's moving very slowly and there's not much pressure at all on these motors. You can see with just like a couple of fingers, I can easily move this thing around. So that's how you know that it's ready to turn on. Now, one thing that I forgot, I probably want the screen to be out while I'm recording. So I'm gonna just have to fine tune the balance a little bit more because now it's added a little bit of weight to the side. But that is perfect right there. And I think we're ready to turn this thing on. So I'm just gonna hold the button on the back. It's gonna come alive, and as you can see, it will follow my movement from right to left. This is a setting that I like to keep it in. And then using the thumbstick on the back here, I can control the tilting, the up and down motion. And I can actually connect to this with my cell phone and customize so much of it. I like it to be on a very slow follow speed. It keeps things nice and smooth that way. If you have it set to a quick follow speed, then any little movements, especially if you're running back and forth, you might see some jostling back and forth. So I personally like it to be nice and slow. Now, most gimbals today have 3 different basic settings. One will be total follow, which means it will follow both your panning and your tilting up and down. I personally have it in the second setting, which follows my panning from right to left with my hand movement. But to make it go up and down, tilting, I actually have to use the thumbstick on the back. And then now it's in the third setting where it's not going to follow any movement at all. So you can see I can just spin this around and it's gonna keep facing forward. Like I said, I think I like setting number 2 where it follows my pan from right to left, but I manually, using the thumbstick, have to control the up and down motion. So let's see if I can recreate the shot that we just got with the slider earlier. I'm here on the gimbal in the exact same spot with the tree. Obviously the lighting's a little bit different now, but I'm just gonna try to hold this steady and move my body from right to left to reveal this path. Now obviously it's not quite as smooth as a slider, but man, it's pretty close. And the fact that I can do this with something that I can hold in my hand makes me leave my slider at home a lot more often. So now let's try to recreate the jib shot that we took earlier. So you can actually see I get more of a range of motion with my own arm than I did with the jib. And once again, I'm not going to try to pretend that this is as smooth as a jib arm, but man, it is pretty close. So as you can see, guys, this may not be quite as smooth as a slider or a jib shot specifically, but what the gimbal allows you to do is recreate those shots and so much more. Not only can we move side to side and up and down, but we can also walk forward. We can even run with this and the footage looks pretty good. We can go up and down stairs, something that you are not able to do with any other type of stabilizer. So the bottom line is, if you're at the beginning of your video career and you already own a tripod, I would say a gimbal is number 2 on the list of stabilizers. You can get one of these things for around $300 to $400. It's going to recreate all of the other stabilizers and you can fit it in the palm of your hand.